Railway Conversations with Doc Frank.
Hey, I'm Doc Frank. Welcome to my podcast where every week I'm presenting you authentic, spontaneous and unrehearsed discussions with interesting guests from the rail industry about topics that matter. Make sure you subscribe and tell your friends about it, as this podcast will both educate and entertain them. Thank you for listening.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Railway Conversations with Doc Frank. I am your host of this podcast, Doc Frank, and today's episode is special for a number of reasons. Number one, to be quite honest, a few interviews that I had lined up didn't quite happen as quickly as I thought. So I ended up making one of the key mistakes that a podcaster can make. I ran dry of interviews for today's episode. But I'm trying to make the best of this situation by telling you something about the upcoming CBTC conference that I'm organizing myself. So obviously, if you are interested in railway signaling and specifically CBTC, this will be very interesting because I'm giving some information out that is not previously available. So it's something new up here. But for the more general railway audience, before you switch off, I think this is interesting for a number of reasons. Number one, I'm doing this to explain why I organized this conference by myself, how I got to this. And it gives you a bit of an idea what is possible if somebody is really determined to do something to improve a certain situation, how far you can actually get in your own practice if you are just committed enough to do something. And the other thing is that I hope that by explaining my rationale behind this conference, that it may give you an idea for conferences in other areas of railways, not necessarily CBTC, but your own disciplines. And if it can help the railway industry to generally up their game regarding conferences, I think that would be something that benefits everyone. So I really hope that today's episode will be helpful. A little fringe benefit on the side, you may have noticed when you watched or listened to previous episodes that I usually do not third-party advertisement, but I'm doing some advertisements for my own products and services. This time, I'm not going to be doing this because the whole thing will be about the CBTC World Summit. So other than that, this episode will be entirely ad-free, including free of my very own ads. You can tell me in the comments whether you like this or not and interesting in what you have to say. So let's get into this. A virtual CBTC conference, which is called the CBTC World Summit. This is going down next month on the 20th and 21st of September. And before I explain more about this conference, I want to start with answering the question you may have. Why am I doing this? How can I come to the idea, which some consider a pretty crazy idea, to organize a conference by myself and really go all out, go global, go everything? So the whole thing for me started probably over years where I could compare. I attended several conferences over the years, and I had quite a good comparison between different types of conferences, what I liked about some conferences, what I didn't like so much about others. But the trigger for this conference came about late last year, when I wanted to attend a CBTC conference overseas in North America. I was actually invited to speak at the conference. So I put the presentation topic in, which was accepted by the organizer. So I was scheduled to speak at that conference. But when I started my organization, how to get there, how to fly overseas to get there, how long it will take, how expensive it would be, I found out that things have changed quite a bit since my last flight, which was before COVID. That was late 2022. So between then and the beginning of COVID, I didn't make any flights, let alone overseas flights. And what I found out was that the cheapest, which means the most affordable flight, would have had a travel time of 50 hours one way. And the price was still in the multiple thousands of dollars. The return flight was slightly shorter, I think 45 hours or something, but absolutely insane. And if you wanted to have some shorter travel times, which were still in the area of like 35 hours per direction, you would have ended up with several $1,000s more. So the long and short of it was, including the cost for the hotel on site and the conference costs themselves, I would have been out of pocket by nearly 10,000 Australian dollars without even starting at the conference. The presentation that I wanted to present was about CBTC interoperability, but I only got a presentation slot of 20 minutes with 5 minutes of Q&A, where I thought, well, how on earth can I present a very complex and potentially controversial topic like CBTC interoperability and what can be done about this in only 20 minutes? In a room full of people who will have lots of opinion about it and a lot of discussion need, and then you only have 5 minutes for question and answers. So you can't really have a discussion, at least not an adequate discussion about this at all. And I couldn't get any more time because all the speakers had the same amount of time. But anyway, once I found out what the effort would be and the cost would be to get to that conference, I thought, I can't afford this. So I contacted the organizer. I said, well, look, I can't come. I would like to, but I can't afford to come. But I still would like to present. So surely we can arrange something via Zoom, for example, as I do it right now, that I can present and you can basically see me presenting in the same way that I'm presenting this podcast to you now. But then the organizer said, oh, no, we can't really do that. The hotel we have this conference in doesn't give us the facilities and so on. So long and short of it, I could not present at all, which in hindsight may have been a good thing because, as I said, the time slot was nowhere near sufficient for a complex topic like the one that I had anyway. So then the next thing I said is, well, look, I'm definitely interested to hear or see what the other people are talking about. Is there a way to access the conference materials, like the presentations from other presenters? Because in previous years, sometimes the conference presentations were put on a website, and that wasn't available either. So I completely missed out of this conference because I wasn't there. I wasn't there in person in the room, and I thought that's not just me. The entire exactly same problem would be for anybody not being able to fly to the country of this conference. And at the end of the day, there were only about 300 people or so that fit into the room. And I thought, how many people are there worldwide interested in CBTC? And how many of those were able to go to this conference, which was probably a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percentage. And most of the world would basically completely miss out on what was presented at the conference. So I thought, okay, well, it will be exactly the same situation next year. And interestingly enough, just a few weeks ago, I made another exercise to calculate what it cost me to go to another CBTC conference, also in North America. And this time, the travel time was only in the area of 32, 33 hours per direction again. So all up about 66 hours of travel. And the cost, just flight, accommodation on site, and the conference itself would have put me about 6,000 Australian dollars short. And I thought, well, this is an ongoing issue. This is an issue that not just I have coming from Australia, but anybody who sits in Southeast Asia, in India, even in Europe would have pretty much the same problem. And you can see it as those conferences that the number of people from overseas is extremely limited. It's probably south of 5% of all the attendees, if that. And so I identified a general problem in the conference landscape for CBTC. And I don't like problems. I try to bring the industry forward. So I said, you know what? Let's just see whether I can organize my own conference. So when I thought about doing this, that was basically the decision to organize a CBTC World Summit, because I wanted to make an international conference from all across the world for the entire world market. So all the people missing out of these conferences because they can't afford to fly to North America, I wanted all of them to benefit from the concept of my CBTC conference, the CBTC World Summit. So what I found out once I started thinking about the organization of the conference was that the effort of organizing that conference would probably be pretty much the same whether I'm going for an average conference, which is okay, but not much more than that, or whether I go for a real outstanding top class event. So if you put in the effort anyway, why not aiming for a top class event? And even if you fall slightly short, you still end up with something much better than if you're just aiming for an average event to start with. So for this conference, the CBTC World Summit, I decided to pull out all the stops. I reminded myself of shortcomings that I have witnessed at previous conferences in my own practice over the previous years. And my objective was to address all those shortcomings and to improve on each and every one of them. So first thing is conference location. I mean, if I want to have a conference where I don't have to travel, one of the ways of doing it is organizing it in Perth, where I live. But Perth, as you may know or may not know, Perth is the most isolated of all major cities worldwide. The nearest city from here is Adelaide, I believe, which is 2,700 kilometers away, and it might almost be closer to fly up to Singapore than it is to get to the nearest city of 1 million people in Australia. So that would obviously have consequences with regards to both the available speakers that are happy to come to Perth and also to the people who could attend a conference here. So that was definitely not conducive to my idea of servicing the global CBTC industry with that. So the obvious alternative was to make it a virtual conference where everybody can join over their computer. They can basically watch it on their screen. And that means they can sit anywhere in the world and they would be able to participate. They would be able to attend. So that was the background of creating a virtual conference. An obvious and very positive side effect of having a virtual conference is that nobody had to pay for any travel, because you can watch this from wherever you like, from your home, from your office. So nobody needs to pay for travel. And that would be an extremely big monetary benefit if I keep the price of the conference itself in the same ballpark or even slightly lower than other conferences out there, other live events, and you would save for the travel cost. So in my own example, compared to flying over to North America, I only had to pay for my own conference, if I had to pay, about 5% of the total cost compared to attending a conference in North America. So that's a saving by a factor of 20. That's huge. And I guess it's just as huge for many, many other people in the world who would have simply said, well, I can't afford the travel. I don't get permission to travel by my employer, maybe a government organization. So I would have to go all the way up to the minister to get travel approval. That's all too hard. I don't even consider participating. But with a virtual conference, all these problems go away. There's another example of a virtual conference, which is that I can invite speakers from all over the world. And you can see it in my podcast here. I have had guests from so many different countries, including countries in North America, Canada, for example, countries in Europe, several countries. I had people from India on the show, people from New Zealand, people from all over the world. And I thought the same should be possible for inviting a list of international top-level speakers for this CBTC World Summit. And that's what I did. Now, the next thing is to basically make sure that I'm not getting rid of a number of problems, but with the solution that I'm choosing, I'm creating other problems. So I needed to make sure that I'm addressing everything where my virtual conference, the CBTC World Summit, may fall short compared to live events. And one thing where that could be is that if people go to a live conference, they are there. The conference presentation happen in front of them and they can attend them live and they can ask questions. Okay, how do you do this for a global event? You can't get the entire world on the same schedule because the difference in time zones are just too enormous. I mean, if I compare my own time zone here in Perth with the East Coast in America, we have a time zone difference of 12 hours. So that basically means anything during the daytime here is nighttime in New York and vice versa. So there's no way that we can get everybody on the same schedule, especially if you add up all of the other time zones in between. The solution for that is to create multiple sessions for different regions at the daytime of the respective regions. So I thought 3 sessions in 3 different regions should cover the world quite comfortably. And that's what the planning is. So I have one session, that's the first one on the 20th of September for Asia Pacific. That includes Australia and New Zealand. It includes Southeast Asia, and it goes all the way west to the Indian Peninsula. Then time zone number 2 and session number 2 will be a few hours later for the Americas, for North America, South America, which are roughly in the same band of time zones. I mean, even there between the American West Coast and East Coast, there's a time difference of 3 hours. But then we have a similar problem here in Australia anyway, and between Australia and New Zealand. So you always have to find a certain band of time zones. And if you basically look at the entire world and a time zone range of 24 hours, you try to cut this into 3 parts, you basically end up with a band of roughly 8 hours each. So which would be plus minus 4 hours from the center of this region. So North-South America was a very sensible region for the second session of the conference. And then the third session covers everything in between, which is predominantly Europe, including Africa, which is almost in the same time zone or pretty much in the same time zone, but also the Middle East, where there's a lot of activity going on with regards to CBTC. So you see that I have basically split the entire world in 3 global regions, and each of those regions gets one dedicated session, which happens during the daytime of the respective region. And we are talking about the session start times in just a moment when I give you more details of the conference schedule. The next problem I have is, so for each region, I basically covered the issue that people in this region can watch their session during the daytime if they have time. I mean, very often you will find that work gets in the way and people can't participate because they can't free up an entire day on the day where the conference takes place in their city. So how do I avoid this? Well, I can avoid this problem to record all the presentations and make them available after the conference for replay. So I give you an example. Let's say, for example, you sit where I am in Australia. So the first session, which is Asia Pacific, happens during my daytime. It's a 6-hour session, and I can watch the entire 6 hours live during the day if I can free up my calendar. If I can't do that because I have some other business obligation for my day job or so, I can still watch the sessions that I missed, the presentations that I missed later on, next weekend, in the evening after work, whenever I have time, whenever it suits me, from wherever I want to, my own home, my office, wherever. The other benefits of having access to recordings for replay is that I don't have to stay up all night to watch the other sessions. So, for example, the session for the Americas, for North and South America, would be at nighttime in our time zone here. So anybody in Australia who wanted to watch the session in North and South America would have to spend 6 hours during the night. So that basically means hardly any sleep, a night shift. And the consequences for next day's work, you can roughly imagine. You would have a hangover like no other. So, but with recordings for replay, you can avoid this issue as well. You can choose to watch your own local session live, and then you watch the other sessions which happen during the nighttime or at less convenient times at a later point in time when it suits you better. And then you can decide whether you watch the presentations one by one, whether you do a binge watch of an entire 6-hour session with 6 presentations in a row, or you watch 2 or 3 of them. So the flexibility is pretty much endless. The next thing I wanted to address is the networking aspect. Many people go to conferences not just to listen to the presentations and get to hear the latest insight, but they also want to meet with other people. They want to network. Now, obviously, in a virtual event, this is much more complicated. Some people may even say it's impossible. So I thought, how can I provide at least some networking opportunity to take the edge out of this thing, to avoid it becoming a disadvantage compared to other conferences? The solution is the creation of an online community just for the conference. So for people who attend the conference, they will get access to an exclusive online community where they can communicate and network with everybody else in this community. That will be other attendees. It may be other speakers. It will definitely be me as the conference host and organizer. So there is a networking opportunity which is quite substantial and which even has one big advantage compared to a live conference. What is it? In a live conference, you've got your live networking, but once the conference is over, everybody goes home. And you may have had this before, that you left the conference and you thought, shoot, I really wanted to talk to this person and that person and that person, but there were so many people that I needed to network with. I just couldn't talk to everybody. And now the conference is over and everybody has gone home. Well, in this case here, the online community will live on. So that means if you didn't have the opportunity to talk to somebody or network with somebody during the conference, you just do it a few days later because the community is still there. The opportunity for networking is still there. Now, I've talked about all the things that I'm doing for the audience, for the attendees. No travel, no need to be live attending all the presentations, the possibility to watch replays. Like another thing with a live conference, if you say, well, I needed to go to the toilet, I missed the critical 5 minutes of this one presentation, which was so important, but I just needed to go. Well, If you have replays, you just watch it again and again and again, how often you like. You don't have to watch it multiple times, of course, but if you want it, or if a few days later you said, oh, wait a minute, this guy was saying something, what was that again? So you can rewatch it and you can fill in the gaps to make sure that the most important bits of the conference are really there. And you can watch them as often as you need to understand them. Now, we talked about the attendees, and I think it's extremely good service, which is getting as close to a live event as it can be, but without the travel cost and with the convenience of sitting in your own home or your own office. So let's talk about the speakers. And we need to talk about the speakers because the conference without speakers is pretty useless, right? So again, I could take lessons learned from my own speaking experience. In the field of CBTC and high capacity signaling, I'm one of the most prolific speakers in Australia over the last 10 years, probably the most prolific speaker, definitely before COVID. And I had the benefit of comparing a number of different conferences and how I was treated as a speaker at those conferences. And something I did not like one bit were those conferences, all too common in our industry, where as a speaker, you even have to pay to attend your own session where you are presenting yourself. I cannot present at the conference without paying an entry fee, which may be generously discounted by 10% or so, which really is ridiculous. I've been to other conferences as well, where the organizers were happy for me presenting to pay not just for my entry fee for the conference, but also for an interstate flight to get there and for the hotel accommodation during the conference. So it is possible to deduce differently. Yeah, but then we need to increase the prices. Yeah, but if you increase the prices, you also increase the quality of the audience. You're getting more executives, but in this case, I decided against that. I wanted it to be as affordable as possible for everyone. So you can come to the CBTC World Summit if you are an executive, and you can come if you're just a normal, maybe a graduate engineer or something like this, somebody at the very beginning of their career. It's open for anyone and everyone, and affordable for everyone and anyone as well. So for my conference, I wanted to treat the speakers as they deserve, as I would want to be treated as a speaker. So there is no need for speakers to travel to the conference because it's virtual. So I didn't need to pay for flight tickets. And generally, I didn't want to pay for speakers to speak at my conference. I never expected to get paid to speak at conferences, but at least I wanted to have access to the conference, and I wanted to avoid any costs to be out of pocket to put effort into present at a presentation. So this is what I'm giving my speakers. So every speaker at my event at the CBTC World Summit enjoys VIP status. That means they get all the perks, lifelong access to all the presentations, they get some special Zoom backgrounds. They are basically treated like the best possible attendee of the conference because that's what they are. If they are not there, the whole point of the conference is gone. So they are the most important people. Sorry, anybody who normally attends the conference, but you will agree. Yeah, if somebody attending is not there, somebody else can attend. If a speaker is not there, the speaker is not there, and you've got an empty slot of 1 hour that you need to fill with, I don't know, going for a walk or something like that. So on that basis, how did I choose the speakers? Now, I have quite a vast international network, in part due to this podcast, which has helped me a lot to build up contacts all over the world. But I did have an international career before, so I already had built up a network. I've been on LinkedIn for 12 years or something like that, or 13 years. So you basically get to know people over time. And I was able to tap into my network and be it just to get some references for speakers. So what I started out with were the topics. So the schedule was pretty clear, 3 sessions in 3 different global regions. Every session I wanted to make 6 hours, and I wanted to give every speaker sufficient time to present a topic properly. What does sufficient time mean? I mean, you don't want to have a 6 hour slot with only 2 speakers and then everybody speaks for 3 hours. No speaker would want that and no audience would want that. So what's the reasonable time frame? And I thought slots of 1 hour lengths would be quite reasonable. So that means the speaker has about 45, maybe 50 minutes time to present the topic, which is much, much better than the normal conference time slots of 20 minutes, or maybe if you're lucky, you get 30, but 45, that's really an XL format for a presentation where you can really go into some detail of the topic you want to present about. Then you have about 5 to 10 minutes time for question and answers, which is again on the upper end compared to other conferences. And then after an hour, you've got a short break for personal needs, stretch break, having a sip of water before it gets to the next topic. And by having this schedule, you can basically schedule your presentations every hour on the hour. So if somebody can't attend all the presentations, people know when to chime in time for the next presentation that comes up. With regards to the topic, I only had one criteria. Would that topic be interesting enough that I would want to attend a conference to hear about that topic? That was my only criterion for picking the topics. Because I thought with my experience in the CBTC industry, if I find a certain topic of interest, chances are that the majority of people out there interested in CBTC would also find it of interest. And when we go into the preliminary program of the conference in a couple of minutes, you will see the quality of the topics. Okay, now that I had the topics, 3 sessions, 6 topics each. So I had a schedule of 18 topics that I wanted to cover, 6 for the Asia Pacific session, 6 for North South America, and 6 for Europe and the Middle East. And obviously those needed to be local topics that fit into the respective region. So I had to pick topics in a balanced way, that I had the same number of 6 topics for Asia Pacific, 6 for North South America, and 6 for Europe and the Middle East. So there were some constraints, but all up, not too much. So I basically managed for every of those 3 sessions to come up with 6 very interesting topics. And then all I needed, and it may sound easier than it is to find qualified speakers for the topics that I wanted to have presented. And thanks to my network and thanks to a few nice people who could refer me to other guys who are suitable to present, I basically ended up with finding speakers for pretty much all the topics that I wanted. Now, nothing is perfect, and the people that I picked are really top-class professionals in the industry, and those guys are busy. It's not like sitting around and say, yeah, I can prepare a presentation for you, not a problem, but all the time in the world. So some of them said, I'm sorry, I'm busy. I can't do that. So in that case, I tried obviously to find a replacement speaker for the same topic, ideally without any loss of quality, of speaker quality. And In very few cases, really very few, I'm talking about 2 or 3 instances where I needed to drop the topic and replace it with something else. I mean, what you should have and what I did have was a couple of topics in reserve for each of the 3 sessions. So I was basically able to fill back some of the topics with others that you will find just as interesting as the original topics, where you didn't even know what those topics were. So let's go through the program to the extent that it already stands. So we have just under a month until the conference starts on the 20th of September. And at this point in time, I've got 14 of the 18 speakers confirmed. So that's a pretty good hit rate of definitely over 80%. And I'm just going through the conference schedule now and give you at least a little teaser about some of the topics and some of the presenters that I will have at the conference. And I hope you will agree, at least if you know a little bit about the industry for CBTC around the world, that the list of speakers that I have come up with is the most international that any CBTC conference around the world ever had. So before I do that, I came up with a vision for the conference, and I came up with a mission for the conference. And now you may say, okay, well, vision, mission, I've heard of all this. Normally it's some empty words, but just listen to what it is, and then you can measure me to what extent I will follow up on those statements. The vision of the conference, CBTC World Summit 2023, is worldwide sharing of leading-edge CBTC insights. Just keep this in mind when we go through the topics and through the speakers in a few minutes, whether you would say, yes, it's worldwide, it's CBTC insights, and those insights are really leading edge. Things that I didn't know about before, or I somewhat heard about, but I haven't heard about it in more detail, so I'm keen to find out more. So that's the first measuring stick. The second one is the conference mission. Here's the kicker, let this sink in. The conference mission of the CBTC World Summit 2023 is to create the best global CBTC conference in history. I'm shooting for the stars here. I'm trying to create the best thing since sliced bread. And since sliced bread has nothing to do with CBTC, the best thing ever when it comes to CBTC conferences. It's a very bold statement. I don't want to stand there and say, I'm so much better than everybody else. But by aiming this high, what I'm trying to create is really a world-class CBTC conference. And then some people may say, yeah, but it's not the very best. There was one in 1997. Honestly, I don't care. Yeah, whether somebody says it's the best of the year or somebody says it's the best of the last 10 years or so, I honestly don't care, as long as people all agree it's a great conference. That's what I'm aiming for. So let's have a look at the 3 sessions. So as I said earlier, session 1, I'm just scrolling a bit to bring this up. So session 1 is Asia Pacific. And I said that this session happens during the daytime of the Asia Pacific region. So, and I also said that the Asia Pacific region reaches from India in the west all the way to New Zealand in the east, which is the furthest to the east before we get to the time zone boundary. So for people in India, in Delhi, for example, Indian Standard Time, the session starts at 8:30 in the morning, and then it goes for 6 hours until 2:30 in the afternoon. So that's clearly during daytime, 8:30 to 2:30. For Sydney, for example, the session goes from 1 o'clock in the afternoon till 7 o'clock in the afternoon. It's getting late in the afternoon, but it's still it's still during the daytime. And in New Zealand, it's even a bit more than that. I think in New Zealand, it goes till about 9 o'clock at night or so. But then New Zealand doesn't really have any CBTC projects, so it's probably tolerable if they have to stretch, if somebody from New Zealand really wants to watch. I would welcome you Kiwis very much, by the way. So 6 hours, how does this translate to some other time zones, for example? So if I look at some cities in the Middle East, Dubai, for example, that session time would be from 7 in the morning till 1 in the afternoon. So again, pretty much during daytime if you get up early. For Central Europe, it would be from 5 o'clock in the morning to 11 o'clock in the morning. So at least the later session would be absolutely accessible during breakfast or just after. But for the Americas, it would really be in the middle of the night. So in New York, the session would actually start on the 19th of September at 11 o'clock at night. And in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil, it would start at midnight. So 6 presentations for Asia Pacific and 6 topics which I hope really pique your interest. So I didn't just want to have normal project reports from any CBTC project in the world. I wanted to see what is special about those projects and what is something where people say, oh, wait a minute, I really want to find out more about this. I really want to learn about that. I wonder how they have done that. And the first presentation we start off with is exactly one of those. So the first CBTC application here in Australia is in Sydney for Sydney Metro. And what they're currently doing is they're taking an existing railway line out of the existing suburban commuter network, and they convert this line to unattended metro operation. So that's the topic of the first presentation. I have a presenter who was intimately involved in this project for Sydney Metro, really knows what he's talking about. His name is Steve Alday. And I think this corridor conversion is really something which may be relevant for other countries as well, or maybe some countries have shied away from it by saying, oh, well, this is just too hard. And people may say, well, if they have done that, I'm really interested in finding out what they needed to do, how they have done that, and maybe is something that's also applicable for my own country. The second presentation I have, and I'm extremely happy that I could score this speaker, is one of my favorites from one of my favorite metros in the world, from Singapore. Singapore Metro, I keep referencing in my training courses on CBTC as one of the model metros around the world. And I have one of the top CBTC specialists from there. His name is Robert Cook. And he gives a presentation how to turn a standard off-the-shelf CBTC product into a working train control system for a sophisticated metro. And if there's a metro that is sophisticated, it's the one in Singapore. Trust me on that. In the current agenda, I'm still in there myself as a speaker. One, because, as I said earlier, I'm the most prolific conference speaker for CBTC in Australia. So I think it justified objectively that I'm participating as a speaker in my own conference or in any global conference that's organized in Australia. And the topic that I have thought presenting is how to transform a railway organization from conventional signaling to CBTC, which is really a major shift, not just in technology. You're not just replacing one signaling technology with another one, but it's a major organizational shift, a major cultural shift to the entire railway organization. And from my experience, a number of railways are struggling with this big time. So I think presenting about this in a bit more detail and a bit more elaborate will be of interest to pretty much anybody, any railway going from an legacy signaling system, conventional signaling, fixed block, to a new CBTC cap signaling without signals. The next presentation, and again, that's a major score where I'm extremely proud of that I could manage to get this on board. The hotspot for CBTC globally, you may probably know this, is China. There are more metro projects in China than pretty much the entire rest of the world. And accordingly, the number of CBTC projects in China is absolutely skyrocketing. And what China has done a few years ago is to develop their own sets of CBTC standards. And one of the key hallmarks of those standards is that they enable interoperability between different Chinese CBTC products. So I wanted to have somebody presenting on this because I think this is really relevant for the rest of the world to hear about this. And I managed to get one of the masterminds of this standard development to present at the conference, and that's Professor Yuneng Huang from the Beijing Lab of Ray Traffic, and he's also one of the key figures of CAMET, which is the China Association for Metros. The next presentation is about delivery of CBTC in an operating environment where you can't really afford to stop your train services and just shut down the railway for weeks on end. You need to keep your trains running, and you still need to install and test and commission your CBTC. Something that most people will say it's impossible. Now, what I'm addressing in my training courses is showing that it's not impossible. I call this zero disruption delivery. I've written an article about this. But rather than presenting this myself, I wanted to have somebody from a railway who's actually done this. So I tried to get a speaker from Hong Kong. I couldn't get a speaker from Hong Kong because the guys at MTR were all too busy, the relevant guys who could present this. I will now get somebody from the supplier who delivered CBTC without disrupting the railway. The speaker still needs to be confirmed, but I'm confident that I will get this done until the conference. If not, I've got a couple of topics in the back pocket that I would want to bring in instead. And then the sixth and last presentation of the session 1 is about the first CBTC in Indonesia, in Jakarta, which is the capital of Indonesia, as you probably know. And what's interesting about this, really from a global and general perspective, is how do you bring CBTC into a city which is so congested that you can hardly move anything? You can hardly walk through the city without disruption, let alone running trucks and trains and delivery equipment and whatever. So you will get to hear how to create space for CBTC and how to install CBTC in a highly congested city. And everybody will probably agree with me that if it comes to congested cities, Jakarta in Indonesia is right up there. So let's go to the second session. Before we close, there is something happening at the end of session 1 for Asia Pacific. After the 6 presentations are completed, there is a certain VIP status for my conference. So I got 2 different classes of tickets. I've got a standard ticket, which includes all the presentations and the replays. I also have a VIP package with several additional perks. And one of these perks is a so-called VIP fireside chat that goes on at the end of each session. So there are 3 of them, and they will be recorded for VIP. So there's a replays of those fireside chats as well. And during those fireside chats, I will be inviting all the speakers of this session. Whether they all can make time, I don't know, but anybody who wants to come as a speaker is invited to come. So together with me as the host, we will be up to 7 people there who have presented at the session. And the VIPs can then listen to the discussion between the speakers, which I think will be interesting in itself. And they can also ask questions to the speakers that they may not have had opportunity to ask before. So it's one of several benefits that VIPs get. If you want to get the full information, just go to the conference website and find out for yourself. It's definitely worth considering. So now let's go to session number 2. And this is for North and South America. So this is now during the daytime in this region. So for New York City, for example, the session will start at 12 noon and will continue to 6 o'clock in the evening. In Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, it will go from 1 p.m. till 7 p.m. in the afternoon. And for America's West Coast, for example, San Francisco, it will start at 9 o'clock in the morning and will go to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So it's all solid during the daytime in the Americas. Other time zones will have a bit more of a problem there. For Central Europe, for example, the session will start at 6 p.m. in the evening and will go to midnight. So this is already borderline half a night shift. And it gets worse the more you get towards the east. So in India, for example, that session would be from 9:30 at night till 3:30 the next morning. So that would be pretty much a full night shift. You don't really want that for people. And in Sydney, for example, it would be from 2 o'clock in the morning till 8 o'clock in the morning. But again, you have the replay option, so you don't need to waste your night to watch the presentations from America live. Now, what may surprise you is that I don't just have speakers from America on the American session. I had speakers who were most suitable to present about certain topics that are relevant for North America. So the first speaker in this session is actually not from America at all. He's from Sweden. And Sweden is in Europe, obviously. So, and he will talk about a key role that his company has played for a very famous CBTC project in North America. I'm not going to give away which one it is, but it will definitely be worth listening to that. The second presentation of this session is not confirmed yet, and that's because the topic of the presentation is so hot, it's so new, it's so current, that the speaker first needs to get permission from the railway authority whether he's allowed to present about it. So that's the kind of caliber of topics that I'm presenting to you at this conference. So I'm not disclosing the speaker now because it's not finally confirmed. If he can't present on that topic, then I will need to see whether I find another topic for the same speaker or an entirely different speaker. We will need to wait and see. The next speaker that I have is very, very well established in the world of CBTC with decades of experience, one of the most experienced CBTC specialists worldwide. And his name is Youssef Kimyaga. And what Youssef is not just a consultant for CBTC in quite a senior role. He's also the leader of the working group in the IEEE that develops and maintains the first and original set of CBTC standards, IEEE 1474. So I couldn't think of anybody better than Youssef to present about both the history and also the future outlook for the IEEE 1474 standards for CBTC. And trust me, this will be much more interesting than it may sound at the outset. The next topic in this session is really comes from the heart. Ever since I heard what the guys in Brazil, specifically in Sao Paulo, do regarding service frequencies of trains, I wanted to find out more about it. And what I managed to get is a speaker from Metro de Sao Paulo to present on all the different CBTC things that are going on in Brazil. And I can tell you, if you haven't heard about this before, it will absolutely blow your socks off. Sao Paulo in Brazil is one of the global hotspots for CBTC, and you won't believe your ears if you listen what this presenter has to say. His name is Christian Becker. He's been in the CBTC business for more than 20 years, and he certainly knows what he's talking about, specifically when it comes to his own metro railway in Sao Paulo. The next topic is not yet confirmed. It's a CBTC project in a North American city. I'm still waiting for a speaker confirmation. Maybe I need to find a replacement there. So it's one of very few things which is not yet specified. But I'm closing out the American session with another highlight, another speaker from Canada with a very, very long track record of CBTC consultancy work and CBTC project work. His name is Naeem Ali. He is specifically specialized on unattended CBTC, so the higher grades of automation, GOA 3 or GOA 4. If you don't know what it is, I'm sure you will get educated during Naeem's presentation. And the title of his presentation will be "What's so special about unattended CBTC?" compared obviously to a CBTC where you still have a driver, and you will see that the differences are quite profound. And I hope that will be a beautiful session to close off this session about North and South America. After that, of course, there's another fireside chat for the VIPs. If you wonder what the cost of the VIP ticket is, it's $200 Australian more than the standard ticket. But on the other hand, you get, I think, $300 worth of goodies, discounts for training courses and stuff. So you are not really out of pocket, but you get heaps of additional benefits. It's definitely worth checking out. By the way, if you want to check out either of those options, the standard ticket or the VIP ticket, the website to do this on, and I will put this in the show notes for the podcast, it's docfranktraining.podia.com/summit23. And I have expanded the site, so now both options, standard and VIP, are on that same website since the last weekend. So you will find all the necessary information. You can compare the options and then make up your mind what's the best one for you personally, whether you consider yourself to be a VIP or just a normal person. So let's go to the third and last session, which is for the region Europe and Middle East. I have combined those two simply because they fit kind of into the same time zone range. They are relatively close together. I was actually surprised when I found out. By the way, sorting out all those time zones around the world was a major effort. And I should probably give a shout out to the website timeanddate.com, because this has helped me big time to sort out all the different starting times. I was just lucky that the conference time frame in September doesn't fall into the changes between daylight saving and normal time. Otherwise, it would have gotten even more complicated. So fingers crossed that I haven't done any mistakes with all the different start times and when the speakers need to be available, which is yet another thing. A major effort. That was one of the biggest challenges of the entire conference organization, can tell you that much. Right, so the session number 3 is during the daytime in Europe. So in Central Europe, it would be from 10 o'clock in the morning till 4 o'clock in the afternoon. In London, it would be from 9 in the morning to 3 in the afternoon. In the Middle East, for example, in Dubai, it would be from 12 noon till 6 o'clock at night. So it's all during the daytime, either in Europe or in the Middle East. Some other time zones may struggle a little bit more. Sydney, for example, that session would be from 6 o'clock in the evening till midnight. That's pretty much the end of the whole thing. And for the people in America, it would start pretty much in the middle of the night. So San Francisco, that session start time would be 1 o'clock in the morning. But again, you can refer to the replay option to cover this and basically don't miss your good night's sleep. So because of the time zone differences, I'm starting this session with the presentations from the Middle East, and then I have the European presentations afterwards, so that it's kind of suitable presentation times for all the speakers. And I'm starting this session off with a presentation from Dubai, which is the city in the Middle East where CBTC was pretty much pioneered. And by now there are different applications of CBTC for different operations, for different transport modes. One is for heavy metro, one is for light rail. So we will get to hear a presentation about light rail. But while this would normally not have been my focus for the conference, what's special about this is that they operate CBTC very reliably without secondary train detection, which is an often discussed issue when you introduce CBTC. Should we have a secondary detection or not? So Dubai is a beautiful example how a railway can operate very reliably without a secondary detection. And I hope this is really the key thing there of interest for most of the people in the global CBTC community. The next presentation, and I still need to get confirmation there, but one of the most impressive feats recently for CBTC, I think, happened in Doha, in Qatar. You may recall late last year, there was a Soccer World Cup held in Doha. And in time for the Soccer World Cup, so really hard deadline that nothing could shift really, they needed to complete an entire metro network. 5 lines, all fitted with driverless CBTC. So a major feat to get this done. So I'm trying to get a presenter from there. I do have a contact, I'm pursuing it. Can't promise it yet, but that's what I'm aiming for. Otherwise, I need to find a replacement. The next presentation, I think, is also very interesting because for the insiders in the CBTC industry, you will have noticed that recently there was a lot of mergers between different established CBTC suppliers. And a lot of people have complained about the reduction in competition in the marketplace because you basically have only 3 major players left, which are Siemens, Alstom, and Hitachi. They all have different CBTC products, so a range of different CBTC products, but still, in terms of competition, you are left with 3 big companies. But this is not all. There are new companies coming up and developing their own CBTC products. And I thought it would be interesting for you, for anybody attending, to present one of those companies and let them talk about their journey from scratch to a fully fledged CBTC product. So it's a company from a country that you may not necessarily expect, from Turkey. And so it's a Turkish supplier venturing into the field of railway signaling and developing their own CBTC product for a first application in Istanbul. And I mean, Istanbul is definitely, it's a huge city, and the reliable metro operation in Istanbul is really critical. So if a product is good enough to run operations in Istanbul, it's probably also good enough to run operations elsewhere. So this is serious stuff, and I think you will be very interested in seeing that new suppliers, and this is just one example, are coming up on the horizon, developing CBTC products for future competition. The next presentation is a presenter from Sweden, and he will talk about Stockholm and the experience with CBTC in Stockholm. So we are still fine-tuning the actual topic of the presentation because not everything with CBTC in Stockholm was perfect and rosy. So there may be some very interesting lessons learned in there, but we will need to see what can be presented, what would be commercially sensitive, and so on. So again, another example where you can see that the topics I'm having are really cutting edge. In some parts even slightly controversial. So definitely something that needs to get clearance before it can be presented at the conference, and I'm doing my best to driving my speakers towards that. The next presentation is interesting because it covers something that's often underestimated and underrepresented, and that's the area of CBTC testing. So if I look at the tools available for CBTC testing, my impression is that there's much more in the ETCS world compared to what's there in the CBTC world. And we will have a presenter from Belgium who has a very strong track record, he and his company, on ETCS testing tools. And he will give us his views, what opportunities are there to transfer those proven and established ETCS testing tools into the world of CBTC, hopefully for the benefits and future improvements of CBTC testing. And then the last presentation, it's another supplier presentation because those are the people currently thinking about it. And what they are thinking about, specifically in the case of Copenhagen, is a migration from a current grade of automation 2 CBTC with drivers to a future unintended CBTC in GOA 4. And the planning of this upgrade from GOA 2 to GOA 4 is the topic of the last presentation of the last session. After that, of course, we will have another VIP fireside chat. And after that, I will probably just fall into my bed and sleep for, 24 hours straight, because I will be arguably the only person who lives through the entire conference and is present at each and every station, because each and every session, because I'm literally doing this by myself. I'm doing everything. I'm doing the hosting, maybe I'm even presenting something, I'm doing the fireside chats, I'm doing all the recordings, I'm doing the editing of the recordings afterwards, the uploading of the recordings for replay. It's all me. It's me, me, and me. And I hope that gives you an idea what is possible. I mean, obviously, if I had an 80 hours per week daytime job, it would be a bit more difficult, but it's still complicated enough. But if you really want to achieve something, then you can achieve quite extraordinary things. And I hope that's one of the key takeaways from you that makes this podcast for you worthwhile. I hope you enjoyed today's episode, which was slightly different from the others, and you could also take something away. Well, definitely you got a taster for the CBTC World Summit coming up. So if you are interested in the field of CBTC, I hope I could convince you that this conference is not to be missed. And you've got so much flexibility that it doesn't really matter what your schedule is in September. You will always have the opportunity to watch each and every bit of this conference. So it would be great to see you there next month. But independent of this, I hope you could get something out of interest for you from this podcast episode. And I will see you again next week with the typical format where I'm talking with the guest and we have the usual conversation of two people. Until next time, keep it simple and bye for now.
Hi, it's Doc Frank again. I hope you liked today's episode. I like to keep it as simple as possible, so I only have one single request for you. If you like this podcast, please tell your friends and colleagues about it. That's all I want, because that's a service that I'm providing to the industry, and I would like as many people as possible to listen to this podcast and learn something from it. So please share, and until next time, keep it simple and bye for now. Thank you for listening.